Alright, continuing with our reading of Marcovaldo by Italo Calvino. This is Winter 8, The Forest on the Superhighway. Cold has 1,000 shapes and 1,000 ways of moving in the world. On the sea it gallops like a troop of horses. On the countryside it falls like a swarm of locusts. In the cities, like a knife blade, it slashes the streets and penetrates the chinks of unheated houses. In Marcovaldo's house that evening they had burned the last kindling, and the family, all bundled in overcoats, was watching the embers fade in the stove, and the little clouds rise from their own mouths at every breath. They had stopped talking. The little clouds spoke for them. The wife emitted great long ones like sighs. The children puffed them out like assorted soap bubbles. And Marcovaldo blew them upwards in jerks, like flashes of genius that promptly vanish. In the end, Marcovaldo made up his mind. I'm going to look for wood. Who knows, I might find some. He stuffed 4 or 5 newspapers between his shirt and his jacket as breastplates against gusts of air. He hid a long snaggle-toothed saw under his overcoat, and thus he went out into the night, followed by the long, hopeful looks of his family. He made a papery rustle at every step. The saw peeped out now and then above his collar. Looking for wood in the city, easier said than done. Marcovaldo headed at once towards a little patch of public park that stood between 2 streets. All was deserted. Marcovaldo studied the naked trees one by one, thinking of his family, waiting for him with their teeth chattering. Little Michelino, his teeth chattering, was reading a book of fairy tales borrowed from the small library at school. The book told of a child, son of a woodsman, who went out with a hatchet to chop wood in the forest. That's the place to go, Michelino said. The forest, there's wood there, all right. Born and raised in the city, he had never seen a forest, not even at a distance. Then and there, he worked it out with his brothers. One took a hatchet, one took a hook, one a rope. They said goodbye to their mama and went out in search of a forest. They walked around the city, illuminated by street lamps, and they saw only houses, not a sign of a forest. They encountered an occasional passer-by, but they didn't dare ask him where a forest was. And so they reached the area where the houses of the city ended, and the street turned into a highway. At the sides of the highway, the children saw the forest. A thick growth of strange trees blocked the view of the plain. Their trunks were very, very slender, erect or slanting, and their crowns were flat and outspread, revealing the strangest shapes and the strangest colors when a passing car illuminated them with its headlights. Boughs in the form of a toothpaste tube, a face, cheese, hand, razor, bottle, cow, tire, all dotted with a foliage of letters of the alphabet. Hurrah! Michelino said, this is the forest. And, spellbound, the brothers watched the moon rise among those strange shadows. How beautiful it is. Michelino immediately reminded them of their purpose in coming there. Wood. So they chopped down a little tree in the form of a yellow primrose blossom, cut it into bits, and took it home. Marcovaldo came home with his scant armful of damp branches and found the stove burning. Where did you find it? He cried, pointing to what remained of a billboard, which, being of plywood, had burned very quickly. In the forest, the children said. What forest? The one by the highway. It's full of wood. Since it was so simple and there was need of more wood, he thought he might as well follow the children's example, and Marcovaldo again went out with his saw. He went to the highway. Officer Astolfo of the highway police was a bit short-sighted, and on night duty racing on his motorcycle, he should have worn eyeglasses, but he didn't say so for fear it would block his advancement. That evening, there was a report that on the superhighway a bunch of kids was knocking down billboards. Officer Astolfo set out to inspect. On either side of the road, the forest of strange figures, admonishing and gesticulating, accompanied Astolfo, who peered at them one by one, widening his nearsighted eyes. There, in the beam of his motorcycle's headlight, he caught a little urchin who had climbed up on a billboard. Astolfo put on the brakes. Hey, what are you doing up there? Jump down this minute. The kid didn't move and stuck out his tongue. Astolfo approached and saw it was an ad for processed cheese with a big child licking his lips. Yes, of course, Astolfo said and zoomed off. A little later, in the shadow of a huge billboard, he illuminated a sad, frightened face. Don't make a move! Don't try running away! But nobody ran away. It was a suffering human face painted in the midst of a foot covered with corns, an ad for a corn remover. Oh, sorry, Astolfo said and dashed away. The billboard for a headache tablet was a gigantic head of a man, his hands over his eyes in pain. Astolfo sped past, and the headlight illuminated Marcovaldo, who had scrambled to the top with his saw, trying to cut off a slice. Dazzled by the light, Marcovaldo huddled down and remained motionless, clinging to an ear of the big head, where the saw had already reached the middle of the brow. Astolfo examined it carefully and said, "Oh, yes, Stoppa tablets. Very effective ad. Smart idea. That little man up there with the saw represents the migraine that is cutting the head in two. I got it right away." And he went off, content. All was silence and cold. Marcovaldo heaved a sigh of relief, settled on his uncomfortable perch, and resumed work. The muffled scrape of the saw against the wood spread through the moonlit sky.